Between 1869 and 1939, more than 100,000 home children were sent from Britain to Canada as a part of a massive child emigration scheme. Many were exploited, many were isolated, and almost all of them were separated from their families forever. But here's the question that I want to explore in this video. How often did Canada's federal government actually talk about this program while it was happening? Was it widely debated, criticized, or was it ignored? Today, we're going to look directly at Canada's parliamentary and archival record to find out. First, however, to understand the Home Children program and how it appeared in Parliament, we need to take a step back and look at what the program was. The scheme emerged in the late 19th century as Britain faced massive urban poverty. Charitable organizations claimed that sending poor or orphaned children overseas would rescue them from the slums and give them a fresh start. Canada was in need of farm labor and domestic workers. Therefore, it became the largest receiving country. The program ran from 1869 to 1939. More than 100,000 children were shipped across the Atlantic. Most arrived through large emigration agencies like Barnardo's, the Sisters of Charity, the Catholic Emigration Society, and couriers. Children were often placed in receiving homes, often in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba, where they were assigned to Canadian families as laborers. Although these organizations promoted the program as charitable, the reality was deeply uneven. Many children were treated fairly, but many others faced isolation, overwork, physical punishment, and separation from their siblings. Some never learned what happened to their parents. Others grew up believing that they were unwanted or abandoned, when in fact, many of their families had never consented to their migration in the first place. This mix of exploitation, philanthropy, and national labor policy is what, in my opinion, makes the Home Children program so complex, and why examining that within Parliament, whether they engage with it or tried to silence the matter, is so important and why it matters. As I mentioned previously, the topic of this video is how much did Parliament talk about this. To investigate this, I analyzed parliamentary Hansard debates, Canadian and UK sessional papers and journals, UK House of Commons papers that reference Canada, and Library and Archives Canada files connected to immigration policy. For this, I used 4 guiding questions that I wanted to figure out. Was the program mentioned in major debates like in question period? Did certain political parties talk about it more than others? Were there any home children who became members of parliament and spoke out about it? And finally, was there a chance that the program was mostly ignored at the political level? In regards to what Parliament actually said, an interesting thing that I found is the term home children barely appears at all in Canadian parliamentary debates during the years that the program operated. But this isn't because MPs didn't talk about it. Instead, they used completely different language. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the government referred to these children using terms like juvenile immigrants, pauper children, child emigration schemes, or even just references to specific agencies like Barnardo's children. Much of the conversation appears in sessional papers, not Hansard, meaning it was treated bureaucratically rather than publicly debated. This itself is significant. It shows the program was viewed as administrative, not political, something handled quietly, without sustained debate or scrutiny. Something even more interesting, however, is that the UK House of Commons discussed the program far more openly than Canada's Parliament did. In 1874, a parliamentary inspector named Andrew Doyle investigated child emigration to Canada and found major issues with placement quality, oversight, and treatment. His report was formally tabled in the UK House of Commons in 1875, and in 1913, the UK Parliament debated child emigration to Canada directly in Hansard. So while Canada was receiving these children, the loudest debates about their welfare was happening in London, not Ottawa. One of the most interesting parts of this research is discovering what happened to home children after they grew up. Previously, I made a video about home children who served in the First World War. However, another interesting aspect that I was very interested to explore is if any went on to serve in Canadian politics. Based on the historical work and databases maintained by home children advocacy organizations or Federal Archives Canada, I found no information that suggested that a British home child went on to become a Canadian member of parliament, provincial parliament, or even a municipal politician. Although it's still possible, there simply isn't enough evidence to confirm this. However, what we do have evidence for is children of home children who later went on to become members of parliament. One example of this, and what I found to be the most notable, is that of the former leader of the opposition and Bloc Québécois leader, Gilles Duceppe, who was the son of a British home child and later went on to joke about it, saying that he was, quote-unquote, a bloke who turned bloc.
How do you balance Quebec's needs there?
I think that we don't have anything against Anglophones. My mother's name Rolly, my grandfather was a home child, so I am a bloke who turned black. So. And
a bloke who turned black. You got to get
that's a good line.
You need a T-shirt for that.
However, the larger question remains: was the Home Children Program largely forgotten in Parliament? And the answer seems to be partly yes. There were administrative reports, immigration returns, and occasional questions, but no major political controversy, no sustained debate, and certainly nothing close to parliamentary scrutiny. This silence says something very important. Programs affecting marginalized or powerless groups, especially children, were often implemented with minimal oversight and almost no political accountability. The way the Home Children Program can be compared in a lot of ways to the way in which residential schools were handled within Parliament. So, what does this all tell us? The Home Children Program was one of the largest child migration schemes in Canadian history, yet Parliament barely spoke about it. It exists mostly in reports, bureaucratic files, and administrative correspondence. The real debates happened elsewhere, in the UK, in charities, and in newspapers, but not in Ottawa's House of Commons. Understanding this gap helps us see how government policy can profoundly affect people's lives, even when it isn't openly debated. And for the descendants of home children today, this history isn't just archival. It's personal, which is why it's a shame that going through all this research that there was so little in regards to sustenance within our House of Commons. Thank you.